Okay, so welcome everyone, and thanks for taking your time for watching this conversation here live on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on YouTube. We are streaming for three of my social channels. I'm Paul Nunes Dia, and with me today are Martin Duffy. We're both co-authors of Beyond Virtual Meetings, and it's really a pleasure to entertain a conversation, a live chat on chaos and complexity with three guest experts that are here with us today. And I think that I was explaining while before we were going live, the reason why these three gentlemen and lady are here with us today is that when we Google search on LinkedIn, chaos and complexity, so these are the top experts that the LinkedIn network recommends to us, right? So it's really great for me to have the privilege and the honor to have these three gentlemen and lady here with us today, experts on the field. And I think that before we start the conversations, and Martin, feel free to step in when you like, I would like to ask by alphabetical order and starting with Jacqueline. Is there anything you like to share about yourself, Jacqueline? And the same question for all guests to our viewers that are watching us right now.
Yes, thank you for having me. I guess in terms of complexity, the space that I'm working in really came from a dissatisfaction with the way that we were doing organisation development and leadership development and change management that just wasn't working. And now the work that I do sits in three areas under the banners of anticipate, navigate, lead. So when we think about complexity and we think about strategy, that's really about rather than foresight and imagining that we can predict and control the future, it's actually about developing an anticipatory capacity to spot what's coming, what the weak signals are in the environment, and what's coming at us in a non-linear way rather than a linear progressive way that forecasting would. So that's the anticipate side of it. The navigate side of it is really about thinking very differently about how we do change. And rather than thinking that we do change to people in a kind of diagnostic way, we tell them what's wrong with them, and we apply standard ways of thinking about what the solution ought to be, that it's a much more sort of dialogic approach where we enter into conversation and dialogue with them and work collaboratively with what is. And the third one is the area of lead, which is really that, I believe that psychology has dominated leaders' development for too long, and it is time to bring in and take seriously sociology and anthropology, and the fact that leadership is a relational and collaborative act. So that's really the space that I'm in, the work that I do, and what I'm kind of professionally dedicated to.
Thank you, Jacqueline. But I was thinking about what personally brought you to this field. What was like the reason why you are so deep on this field today?
Well, I also did a PhD. I did it under the tutelage of Robert McIntosh, who had done early work with Ralph Stacey and others. And it was a conversation, in the kind of old part of Glasgow University where he said, now it's time to look at the ologies, Jacqueline. And I had no idea what the ologies were. And of course, the ologies are methodology, epistemology, ontology. And I knew methodology. I had a master's degree and an MBA. I knew about methodology, but I had no idea what ontology or epistemology was. And it opened up a completely new way of thinking about the world. And it answered many of the unanswered questions that I had in my practice for so many years. And in the end, Robert had to say, you've read enough for 3 PhDs now, Jacqueline, you need to stop and come back to your research, because it was just so fascinating. And so that's what took me to that space.
Fantastic, Jacqueline.
Oh.
Now, following the alphabetical order on this first round of introductions, even though Jacqueline got already deep in the subject, but we finally realized, and thanks for sharing, Jacqueline, the reason why you're in this field. And this is more of the kind of preliminary interventions that I was asking my guest speakers, is what personally we'd like to share on with about yourselves with our viewers. We are now viewers on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Please, viewers, also feel free to comment on these conversations, as we'll use your comments for steering up the dialogue here. So alphabetically will be Walter, right?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Well, thanks for having me here. And of course, I 100% agree with all the things Jacqueline says, and it's exactly the arena in which it should be. I'm happy to share how I got into this arena, and that is out of frustration. I'm a trained econometrician, and for 12 years, I've tried to build econometric models, particularly in the previous century, I admit, particularly in the financial world. And after 13 years, 12 years, I discovered that they don't work. I mean, they do something, but they are absolutely unable to anticipate financial markets. And I got very frustrated, since if you graduate in the 70s of previous century, you believe your professors, and they say that you can model the world. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to do a PhD, I'm going to become an academic, and then I have the rest of my life to think why it doesn't work. And it's exactly what I did. So I did a PhD at Warwick Business School, by the way, and then got into academia. I've been in the Netherlands, France. I've created the ever first business school in Russia when it was still the Soviet Union in 1990. I've been in Spain. I've been 7 years in Cape Town, so as the Dean of the Graduate School of Business. But what attracted me, or how I got into complexity, is from econometrics, I moved rapidly into, and this is 30 years ago, into artificial intelligence, as it was then, neural networks, agent-based simulations. And suddenly you saw something which did seem to work at least much better than econometrics. And that's why I said, gosh, why does it work? And why does it work? Since it is based on complexity, complex adaptive systems, on complexity theory. And that's how I got interested, I think 25 years ago, into complexity theory. I started teaching complexity as a course in business schools, and I've done that ever since. I've done that in executive courses. And I was very intrigued by the Santa Fe Institute, you know, the more mathematical modeling side, until I was visitor at, which is unfortunately not existing anymore, the Complexity Research Center of Aix-en-Provence, which is very much in the French philosophers' tradition. Jean-Louis Lemoyne, Edgar Morin, Paul Cilliers, to take a South African, you know, that kind of more philosophical stance. And a world opened for me. And ever since, I've been developing that. I've been buying some interesting ideas from biology, from quantum mechanics, from whatever. And I'm very, very interested in how does that play in order to solve wicked problems. Problems that matter, problems that have an impact, problems of which you don't know the solution, say Corona or the likes, and how can you deal with those problems where you don't even know what happens tomorrow. And their complexity theory, and particularly complex adaptive systems, is very useful. So that's how I got into the complexity arena, so to say.
Thank you so much, Walter. This is incredible, because we're trying to understand a little bit more about your life stories. And finally, Vander, can you share a little bit why you're in this particular field?
Oh yes, it's a pleasure. At one moment I ended up studying social psychology at quite a regular social science department. But I'm kind of a scientific omnivore. I love it all. And so in the late 80s, I encountered stuff about chaos and complexity. And for me, that was wow. And suddenly I saw a depth in all these social phenomena that apparently other people couldn't see. And I was a little bit surprised about that. But I slowly developed an understanding that in a lot of social science, people are focusing very much on prediction. And it makes sense, because very often social systems are quite stable. But at the moment, a real change is happening when we talk about transitions and so on. are indeed the very complex problems, then we run into the fundamental problems of complex systems that they are not predictable. And especially those situations, I think, are very interesting to study. Conceptually, I also use a lot of agent-based modeling, implementing psychological theory in that. And I think this is a kind of dynamical revolution going on in the social sciences, big words. And in practice, I compare it very often with sailing. I really like to sail up north here among the islands. And sailing is a very powerful metaphor because very often you encounter unpredicted situations. The wind can shift and waves and all kinds of stuff can happen. But if you understand the dynamics, you are very quickly able to spot what is happening and to adapt efficiently. So understanding the dynamics of social systems, I think, is very important to be capable to adapt to situations that happen. So that's basically in a nutshell where I am and what I'm doing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And wow, we have here a panel. Martin, over to you, because probably you're taking some notes like me, and you're eager to take on the mic. So over to you, and then let's the dialogue flow. I have already here a tricky question for the middle of the session.
Cool. Yeah, what an interesting opening, guys. A couple of things that really jump out for me from what all three of you have said. If I was to distill it down into two really simple points. Previously, historically, we all had a very strong tendency to want to predict, anticipate, plan, execute in a very measured, structured, formalized way. What all of you seem to have in common is the idea of the unexpected, the unpredictable occurring, and then how do we handle that? My most recent book has been The Black Swan by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And while he's speaking about a particular niche, if you like, of unexpected events, what I'm hearing from the three of you is a question. Might we be better focusing on our personal and organizational abilities to react and respond, not to any particular occurrence, but just to the unexpected, to whatever takes us out of our pre-planned, pre-anticipated, pre-expected occurrences? So are we better in the Darwinian sense to aim for adaptability as a core organizational personal attribute, as opposed to our historical focus on pre-planning, pre-organization, preempting, and so on?
Well, if I may respond to that, that's a very interesting position you take here. I've been pondering about this quite a bit because if you look at most natural systems, they are self-organized from the bottom up. And in our culture, we see this development of top-down structures that are very much, I see it very much like we are having this kind of industrialized society. And we are at this moment struggling with the industrial principles and dealing with all kinds of transitions. Yeah. And what I see is typically for the industrial way of thinking is focusing on control and predictability. And especially when we deal with wicked problems, just COVID is one beautiful example for that. You see an immediate response of a lot of people. We have to predict what is going to happen, and we have to control. And the whole adaptive capacity is often neglected. And I think there's so much to gain from incorporating much more the power of self-organizational principles in dealing with this. So that is a quick response.
Yeah.
Yeah, my response would really be, yes, I absolutely agree. It is being comfortable in that complexity, understanding it. Since one of the things to make you feel comfortable is that you roughly understand how the mechanisms are, then feel comfortable. And from that comfort, in a network of interacting people, and again, I refer to agents, then reality, just like in nature, as Wanda correctly just said, out of nature, it emerges, in that as long as you have the flexibility and you understand what you see in front of you, you can co-emerge and co-create, and you lay down the path in walking. That famous poem of Antonio Machado that most of the complexity thinkers share in the world. There is no path, so let's not lose our time to try and find it or define it or control it or manage it or whatever, but let us lay down the path in walking, and in walking together.
So I would come in and say that whereas I agree in principle, I think Walter's point about comfort, to the extent we are comfortable, the act of not knowing and leaning into emergence, because that's really what we're talking about here, it is actually a deeply uncomfortable thing for people to do. I mean, we saw in COVID, what was difficult for people was the fact that there was no route map. And so, Martin, when you talk about organizations, well, what are organizations? They are collections of individuals. So we can put processes in place to allow for it. But in order for an organization made up of human beings to be able to respond and adapt more to complexity, we have to do leadership and we have to do organization or our organizing very differently from the way that we currently do. And so what we would bring forward in terms of the adaptive capacity in our leaders and in our people would be very different from what we do today, in order to provide that thing that Walter talks about comfort. To what extent can we be comfortable with the ambiguity that comes alongside, working effectively with complexity.
Interesting grounds, dear guests. I was thinking about introducing now my provocative question, Martin.
Sure, yeah, shoot.
If you don't have anything else on your
notepad.
I wonder sometimes, because obviously this is a devastating pandemic and it's taking away millions of lives by now, and especially in South America, we're seeing lots of suffering.
Yeah.
But sometimes I start to look at history, at human history, and this is what I would like to think on perspective, because myself, when I think about chaos and complexity, I always think that this time of the present are the times where chaos and complexity have emerged, because maybe in the past life was much simpler and less complex. But suddenly I realized that if we look at human history, and let me share here some pictures of what was like in the Middle Ages, the plague, the Black Death, And when I look at these images and I see what kind of suffering and 1/3 of all human population disappeared in the Black Plague. Let me see. I think I have a video here or something here. Yeah, so we can have some images while we are talking. And this is for my curiosity on the experts we have here today with us is that what about chaos and complexity being something that it's permanent in human existence? It's not something that was just invented this precise century, right? What are your views on this?
So I've got an interesting perspective that's come from a range of chief executives that I've just been interviewing for a book, and I was talking about the pace of change and accelerating complexity, and all of them I actually rejected the idea that the stage that we are in now is any more complex than the stages that other chief executives had been in previously. And I do agree with that. I do think that there is something about us being in a digital world that allows for the networked capacity of individuals to be greater than ever before, and that has a consequential impact on the level of complexity. But when we think about complexity belongs to to human societies, to kind of natural societies, and it always has done. The only difference is that in the 20th century we tried to apply force fit the ideas from the physical and natural sciences to those things, and we are coming back to a realization now that it was a flawed logic, and that we were applying the wrong logic to those kinds of problems. But I do think that we have always had and always worked with complexity, and actually we forgot a bit about that when we became kind of an industrialized society.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I even got yesterday a nice animation of 100 years ago, I think, the Portuguese fever, where they even had mouth masks and etc., etc. So if you really saw those pictures like what you're showing here, it was as if you are today, but then 100 years ago. Look, for me, it's extremely simple. Systems are complex, period. You know, they've always been complex. They will always be complex since they're based on interaction of humans. And so you have all the conditions for complex adaptive systems to hit in. Only, I think, what has changed compared to the times you're showing here is that the speed of volatility of the economy has increased. The interconnectedness of the world, of the people, has increased. We have now technologies that can do fantastic things, can do much harm, but can do fantastic things which didn't exist 10 years. You have social media, needless to say that this can be extremely devastating and could be positive. And we have developed over the years problems in climate, in inequality, in poverty, etc. If you bring all that together, it means that the whole playing field is just much more volatile and moving. So you see faster and more complicated the complexity of that world. But that world for me has always been complex and will always be complex by nature and by definition.
I can add to that. I think indeed life is complex by nature. But in the recent history of mankind, we see very interesting developments taking place. First of all, in terms of networks, I want to emphasize that it's tempting to look only at people, but we have to realize that we are connected with all life on this planet. Mm-hmm. And from that perspective, we also see that our species now has a very dominating role, but we also face some very interesting developments, in particular with artificial intelligence as a kind of networked phenomenon that has a major impact on our lives. And the power of the algorithms, how they at this moment are affecting our lives, is amazing. The most interesting thing I read from the field of marketing was that algorithms now are capable of identifying people that are facing a more manic period by tracking their surfing behavior and then making them offers for trips to go gambling in Las Vegas because it will yield poor profit. Mm-hmm. And the scaring thing is that we humans seem to understand increasingly less about how these algorithms do this. And it seems that we have created a kind of artificial life form that is basically growing into our culture. It's already there, and it has a huge impact on the dynamics that we see happening in society. I think about elections and how, for example, algorithms are now interfering with all kinds of elections. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm kind of struck by if I go back to a point that Jacqueline made about the individual. You know, while the organization can appear to have its own personality or its own dynamic, it always comes back to an organization as a collective of individuals, and looking after the individuals effectively becomes the foundation stone to look after the higher order of organizing. But something that struck me out of the pandemic, I live at the edge of a forest. I've got 3 dogs, and I walk them pretty much every day. And for 15 years, I walked in that forest almost every day, and I could count on one hand the number of people that I meet. In the last year, I can't walk in the forest paths now because they're so muddy with so many people walking on the same paths. But what struck me about that is that before the pandemic, I had this sense that we were accelerating at an individual level to the point where we just couldn't keep track of what was going on. And I'm just wondering, has the pandemic decomplexified our lives a little bit? Has it forced us all back to a little bit back to commune with nature, to realize that we are part of the ecosystem, Wander, that you spoke about, that there's a bigger ecology that we all have to fit into. And if we look at that in the context then of the artificial intelligence, of the greater power, if you like, of the social network phenomenons that we've seen, and the new truths, the alternative facts that seem to be preponderant at this point, have we decomplexified because of COVID? And do we have a reset opportunity here? Have we been gifted an opportunity to say we all need to slow down a bit and just rethink what we're doing? Or are we going to get back onto the treadmill as soon as we open up, we get the vaccines, we're all back in business as normal, and opportunity lost? Are we at a switch point here?
Well, in terms of a tipping point, it seems that we are close to a tipping point, and I'm amazed. I mean, it's really very fascinating to think about the plague, for example, where you had years where 1/3 of the population just died. Now we are dealing with disease, and if we look at it from, I don't want to say it's not serious, but if you compare it to the plague, this is a heavy pneumonia, and it's capable of getting a complete control over our society in a way that is unprecedented. And I think this is really fascinating to see what is happening right now. All kinds of policies are implemented, limiting the freedom of people without sometimes a solid scientific basis for that. And people even accept it, or people go very much in resistance. There's a lot of polarization going on that, and that's really fascinating to see. And in a way, you could say that the temperature in the system is going up, and society at large is more prone to take a different course. And of course, we are used to the past. So we have this natural tendency of thinking, going back to what we know. But it's a challenge at this moment to think in terms of scenarios of where do we want to go. And in particular, I think this relation with the natural environment, for me personally, that's very important to share with my students, to be connected with nature, because nature is not an amusement park, but it's, which a lot of students perceive it to be, but it's basically the foundation of our own lives. And so this might be indeed an opportunity to invest in our relation with connecting with nature.
Indeed, my friends. And sometimes I wonder, because we conquered, so to say, our civilization, because in the end, we are all part of the Western civilization. Now, of course, Asia is also part of the same global civilization, but we conquered North American tribes. We brought them the Industrial Revolution, just to arrive to the 21st century and discover that the wisdom of the tribes, the wisdom of the people that were there already in the land, the people in the land, is the right wisdom and the right connections. Isn't this ironic?
But it does refer to what Jacqueline in the very beginning said about an ontology. It is a little bit about your ontology. Huh? The wisdom traditions, whether they are American or any other country, of course, have that inbuilt connection with nature. There is this rule. It has a so difficult name that I don't know, but there is one of the tribes that has as a rule that in every meeting there is somebody who takes care for the 7th generation. So somebody just looks to it. Now, we can't believe that in the West, since we have all followed Descartes. Yeah, I think, therefore I am. As if the ratio is everything, and as if I am important. We have created human doings instead of human beings. And referring to your dog story, I even go with my dog to the sheep, since it's a border collie. So I even go a step further. What you see there is that is bringing you a little bit back to a human being. You know, you live in the day in which you live, and you do the things and enjoy the things they are. So yes, I think we have a reset opportunity, but we have a reset opportunity roughly every day, whether we take it or not, or whether what one says by tradition and facility we are going to go back. I don't hope so, but I'm afraid that it might be the case. But for me, it is really, and I'll refer to the Ubuntu, which is typically African. I am since I belong, and I don't say that all Africans are very good in living that. That's another story. But as an ontology, as a concept, it is so much richer. That is what the original tribes had. You know, I am since you are, and we together get through all problems, right? Also a little bit what the mafia tries to do. That's the negative side of it, but it's the same concept. It is that community idea, which we've also lost. And I think what we have seen again in this pandemic is that community, that human being, you know, that belonging. We're all in it together. How long that will take, I don't know. And whether it will allow a reset, I hope, but I don't know.
Okay. Thanks. I think, sorry, Jacqueline, did I cut you? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think on that, I mean, I think to Martin's original question about the individual is actually that I guess I think we've spent too long on the individual, and actually it is about the collective. And if we have to, if the pendulum has swung too far in one direction, then if there is a correction needed, it is towards community and towards togetherness, rather than away from the individualistic. And in terms of COVID, I mean, you know, I don't know if it's the kind of Scottish in me, but you know, I am a bit pessimistic that COVID will be the big change that we want it to be. I think we're desperate to get back to something much more akin to what our life was before that. We've had enough of, you know, you may have your forest back to yourself, Martin, before too long. And I think that it may be the confluence of other things, perhaps the pandemic. But when we start to see huge weather events and the impact of those weather events or other things that come along, I think that those are the things that, alongside the context of the pandemic, will make us think about our collective responsibility in a kind of complexity frame rather than the pandemic. I think we'll see by the summertime people will be wanting to go back to pretty much the way things were, certainly when we're out in the world.
What do you think is going to drive the direction that we're likely to take? If we're in this chaotic, complex scenario right now, that might be a little bit more chaotic and a little bit more complex than normal, because I think we've all agreed that we've always dealt with complexity. It's just a little bit different form of complexity. But Jacqueline and everybody else, what's likely to tip us in one direction or the other toward reverting back towards the me, myself, and I, where we've come from, versus your proposition, Jacqueline, that we may be heading more towards realizing that the communal, the collective is actually as important, if not more important, to see us all into a more sustainable future together. But is there a tipping point, or is there something that's going to tip us?
I think there's two things on the horizon that make for the possibility of change. I think one of the things on the horizon is our young people, who have a really strong sense of not wanting to perpetuate the status quo in Western society. And as their voices, and not just young people, but as we bring in the diversity of voices, that will have an impact. And I think that may well coalesce with major events that happen, whether they're climatic events or other geopolitical events that cause us to re-examine the assumptions that we have been living under for a really long time. But of course, that is a kind of strategic foresight guesswork on my part, and it might not be that, but that would be what I would be looking out for as I was starting to try and make sense of, is this change happening or not?
Yeah.
Absolutely agree. It's the youth. If it's going to dip, then it is going to be our youth. That what I see from students is that they really fundamentally question what we've been doing, what we are doing, what we're doing it for, and that is encouraging. Now, whether they will be able to push the whole thing over, I don't know. I hope so, but that is for me the one force that I think is going to change it.
Definitely. Listen, guys, we are 35 minutes on the broadcast, and I thought that we could do, first of all, a show of hands. Who is based in Europe right now? All of us. Okay, so I'm wondering if we would like to share a little bit of the idea of the Bauhaus project. Have you heard about the Bauhaus project from Ursula von der Leyen?
No.
Let me share a 3-minute video. I'll cut Ursula in a minute so we can then focus the rest of the conversation on bringing outlook of what the future could be, because this Bauhaus project is quite an interesting, intriguing initiative. Let me just share the presentation of the Bauhaus project that I have it here. Bear with me for a moment. And
the New European Bauhaus is a project of hope. 2021 has just begun. Vaccinations have started. They will help us to get a grip on the pandemic. Our massive recovery plan, Next Generation EU, will support our economies and societies to recover faster and better. And the European Union climate targets will help us to tackle the biggest challenge of our times, climate change. Europe is looking to the future with hope and determination. And the new European Bauhaus fits perfectly into this outlook. It's about how we want to live together after the pandemic, while respecting the planet and protecting our environment. It's about making good life affordable and bringing generations together. It's about empowering those who have the solutions for the climate crisis. It's about matching sustainability with style. It's about all of us. Today, I want to invite all of you to participate in the new European Bauhaus project. We want to make this an inclusive and collective process. We want to listen to you, to your ideas, to your challenges, to your worries, and to your solutions. Together, we want to shape the concept of the new European Bauhaus. We will do it in conversations and workshops, in digital formats, and, when possible, also on the ground.
You're muted, Paul.
what about this interesting proposition, dear guests?
Well, there's nothing real being said, right, about what to do. Well, climate change, okay, it's important. I would focus also very much on the biodiversity as something that might be even more important. But indeed, how to adapt is a key question that we are facing. And I think in adapting to change, we have to be aware that a lot of adaptation has to come from the bottom up. A lot of change is required from community levels. And so I think a big challenge is finding ways to support local communities to make a change. Because I think that partly perhaps top-down policy can support that, but I think there's an enormous potential in supporting local communities and making a change. And this may result in a kind of cultural change that we really need. And I think cultural change can go faster than we sometimes expect. If I just reflect on my menu and the menu that my parents had, then you can see that in one generation a lot can change.
You cannot not agree with her. I think that's what Wonder says. Well, I miss two things in that, and you pointed to one already. One, I think if we want to change it, we will have to be more based on the interaction of people and less on the interaction of countries. I mean, countries is an outdated concept. So is language, so is whatever. We still think as Europe, and now I refer to you. We still think in those terms. So I think we have to forget that. And secondly, bottom up, the role of communities and empowering those communities to take their own responsibility and then co-construct, in between, and again, a network, to go back to complexity, a network of communities that together build a project to Europe. And I miss that idea of network of people rather than network of countries, and the role of communities and bottom up. And I think those two are for me important conditions if you would like to tilt the challenges that the European Union has, to say it nicely.
I actually liked it, and it spoke to me about fashion, and I don't mean, I mean fashion in the broadest sense. So in order for us to change, to really accept our responsibility on climate change, then we will have to change what is fashionable. So we have to change that it will no longer be fashionable to drive a gas guzzling 4x4, or to light your house up like a lighthouse through the night for absolutely no reason, or to consume red meat at the levels that we do right now. And so to me, whether you call it Bauhaus or something else, it is about changing what is acceptable and fashionable. What I would say is that governments are notoriously rubbish at doing that. And so, and of course, I'm in Scotland. I put my hand up for being in Europe. I probably gave my politics away too much there. My heart will always remain there. But I don't hold out much hope that these things can really be centralised. And so to both Vander and Walter's point, I think it happens at a kind of community level, that we decide for ourselves a much more smaller unit what is and what isn't acceptable, and we sanction people in all sorts of interesting and small ways when they go against what's now socially acceptable or what's fashionable. So that's what I took from it. It actually piqued quite a lot of interest for me.
Yeah, I think what I was hearing behind the political messaging, or what at surface level sounded like political platitudes. I was hearing a call for a different philosophy, for a different philosophical approach to where we are and where we've come from. I'm just looking at John Varney has put up a comment here, just saying that our linear economy, where we're all consumers and there's a pitch has to be made in order to get us to consume, and it's the philosophy of winner takes all, greed is good, let me individually accumulate, as opposed to what the European president's message seems to me to be, do we just need to rethink? And I think, Jacqueline, it's going back to your original earlier point about this concept of community over the individual, that we have become too individualistic. And equally, Walter, I think your point that our young people now seem to be gravitating more back towards the idea of community, whether we can do that in a structured way, or is this just going to be an emergent phenomenon coming out of a pandemic situation that has pushed a reset button for everybody? Or if the pandemic hadn't happened, were we going to be triggered by some other event like climate change, catastrophic events in meteorology, or whatever. So I'm reading an inflection point at the European Parliament to say, do we need to adopt some kind of a new philosophy? I suppose my question would be, where's the drive for that going to come from?
And you're back into community.
Yeah, we're back into bottom-up, emergent, systemic, natural systems, as opposed to top-down. Somebody can create the policy and we all build a plan and we'll all follow the plan.
What Jacqueline correctly says, of course, if everybody would adapt his fashion and behave slightly more responsible, then the world is different tomorrow. Now, you can't declare that. You can't decide that in the place of somebody else. You can create conditions, or you can try to support people to do that. And I don't know whether it's really effective, but it will change if we all decide tomorrow to change our lifestyles. And there again, I go back to my youth, since I sort of tend to see, and maybe I'm over-optimistic, but I tend to see that they are redefining their lifestyles. You see, and that might create an interaction and a community response and move up.
Walter, do you have a sense of what's causing that shift in the mindset or the thinking of the younger generation?
I think disappointment with what we have done. I have a number of children, grandchildren, and I'm teaching lots of kids. And to be honest, there is a lot not to be proud about. I don't say there's nothing to be proud
of course,
about. I don't want to be negative either, you see. But it is absolutely true that if you look into the climate crisis, damn, we've created that. Yeah. And in a way, we knew that. You know, they've warned us. We didn't believe it, but they've warned us. And you can go on. And the fact that we all drive too big cars that consume too much fuel, that is, by the way, a source that was reasonably cheap, and you know, and we knew all that. And we, if you look into the world, and I don't say we have to go 50 years back, since that's unrealistic, and I don't think I would really like that. But it is definitely so. When I talk with young people, they just don't point their finger, but they're close to pointing their finger, say, what the hell did you make of this world? Yes. You know, we don't believe in that anymore. No, in general, they're nice, so they won't tell you. But I think that is what brings them to say, do we want that? And if we have the chance to change it, if we have the chance to have a better life, and what is a better life? By the way, for my generation, what was a better life? Success, big car, big house, etc. Even a dog. Hey, I mean, okay, that was sort of what we felt was the ideal life. If you talk today to kids, they say, I like to have a job that I like to do, you know, and that at the end of the day, I feel I'm useful. And I applaud since I say, yeah, but I wasn't like that 40 years ago. I'm now like that, but it took me 40 years. I think that's where it comes from.
Guys, we are 5 minutes to close the session as agreed. I would think about asking each of the guest speakers, what piece of advice will you give to our viewers right now? Our viewers being LinkedIn members, probably managers, probably CEOs of companies, you know, struggling. And Martin, for you, the task to summarize major points. Last, if you take some notes, while we start alphabetically, Jacqueline. So, piece of advice for our viewers, our watchers, LinkedIn members, and watching us right now.
I think my advice would be, don't forget that everything is connected to everything else. So your actions always have consequences, and they are intended and unintended. And play the story to the end when you're kind of making those decisions. And really be curious. Be curious about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Thank you. Walter?
I think I would say two things. One, that we re-understand that there is not us and them, there is not us and nature, but that we're all one big whole. That is one thing. And secondly, to try and become, again, those human beings that initially we are, and that are spiritually connected with all the others, even on a distance, even if you don't know people, but that you do know that you're just part of a wider network, which is humankind, and then behave as humankind. And really, that's what I would suggest.
Thank you so much, Walter. Vander.
Well, on the one hand, I'm working with die-hard computer simulations, but my advice here would be to meditate and to practice compassion. Because I'm really convinced that a lot of people have been fallen in the trap of working very hard to obtain material possessions as a kind of proxy of happiness. And I think this is a deadly trap of our society. And I think to escape from that, we have to indeed, what Walter also says, to connect with everything around us. And meditation and focusing on compassion is really a good start for that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, dear guests. Martin, over to you.
This is, Paul, this is the most difficult conversation to summarize, to be perfectly honest, because we've talked about complexity, we've talked about complex systems that periodically and regularly display chaotic characteristics. But a couple of key things that I'm taking away from the conversation, one, recognizing that we are all part of a complex societal system. Two, recognizing that if we put ourselves individually ahead of the interests of the collective, we will ultimately undermine our own self-interest. Because being part of that collective is what we need and depend on in order to be the human beings that we are. So if we try to set ourselves apart individually from that collective, I suppose the open question is, how do we transition from where I think we had headed towards this individualistic perspective? We're hoping, and I think everybody is agreeing, that our new younger generation are bringing a different mindset, a different perspective, but are we at this competition point? So I'm going to bring in the point that John Varney, one of our viewers' comments brought in. Are we at this tipping point between this historical individualistic view of the world versus this young generation that seem to want to recognize our dependence on the collective? But who's going to win that competition? My personal pitch, I hope the young people have it. That's where I would like to see it go.
They at least will live longer.
To grow up in a different society to the one that we have created. And Walter, I take your point that everything we've done, our generation has done, has not been negative. But maybe, Jacqueline, you made the point, maybe the pendulum swung just that little bit too far in one direction. And maybe we all need to lean towards helping the pendulum shift back to give this sense of community a better break than we might have given it. Maybe COVID is forcing all of us to just rethink our position on all that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, dear guest speakers, for this so useful conversation. I find it really useful also for me. And I hope that our viewers are also enjoying the show. And stay tuned, because next month, 4th of May, we'll be back here with another Lunchtime Talk series. Thank you so much, everybody.
Well, guys, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye, everybody.